What happens when the most polarizing woman in modern royal history decides to show up to Hollywood's biggest night, completely uninvited? The answer, as the cameras and thousands of stunned spectators discovered at the 2025 Emmy Awards, was not glamour, applause, or red carpet adoration. It was booze. Loud, cutting, undeniable booze that ripped through the air like glass shattering in the middle of a symphony. Can you imagine? A star-studded event where the world's biggest names arrive in shimmering gowns and designer tuxedos, flashing smiles at the cameras. And then, suddenly, Meghan Markle steps into frame and the atmosphere shifts. Have you ever felt a room freeze all at once? That sharp intake of collective breath, followed by a wave of disbelief. That was the moment Meghan Markle walked in, uninvited, and was met not with celebration, but with rejection. The Emmys are supposed to be about celebration, prestige, and recognition. They're Hollywood's version of a coronation, the night when television royalty is crowned in front of millions watching at home. But this time, it wasn't about who won Best Drama or which actor gave the most tear-jerking speech. No, this time, the headlines, the whispers, and the viral clips centered around Meghan Markle, who decided, against all odds, to attend an event where she wasn't even supposed to be. Why? That's the million-dollar question. Was it desperation for relevance? A strategic publicity stunt? Or perhaps, as some whispered in the corridors of power, an act of defiance aimed at both Hollywood and the royal family? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about this. Meghan has spent years walking a fine line between being embraced by Hollywood's elite and being rejected by the very world she once dreamed of conquering. Back in 2011, she was just another actress, hustling for bit parts. A few years later, she was thrust into global fame as the woman who captured Prince Harry's heart. But now, in 2025, the world sees her through an entirely different lens. Not as an actress, not as a royal, but as someone who seems to show up where she isn't wanted, forcing her presence into spaces that have already decided they've had enough. Isn't that the cruel irony? To crave recognition so badly, only to find the door slammed shut in your face? This night at the Emmys wasn't just another headline for Meghan. It was a turning point. A moment where the glamour she had been chasing collided headfirst with the reality of her fractured reputation. The boos weren't just a reaction, they were a symbol of Hollywood's growing impatience, a symbol of how far her public image had fallen, and a symbol of the irony that the very world she thought would protect her, elevate her, and keep her relevant, chose instead to scold her publicly. And yes, that scolding wasn't just figurative. Reports say that someone, a major star no less, confronted her directly inside the venue. Can you picture it? The glitz, the flashing lights, the celebrities watching in stunned silence as Meghan Markle is put in her place, right there in the middle of one of the biggest nights of the year. But before we dive into the chaos that unfolded, let's step back for a moment. Why does this story matter? Why does Meghan Markle showing up uninvited to the Emmy Awards carry such weight? It's because this isn't just about Hollywood. It's about the crossroads of fame, power, and rejection. Meghan has always positioned herself as a woman wronged, silenced, misunderstood. Yet here, on American soil, surrounded by the very industry she once belonged to, she was met with open hostility. Doesn't that tell us something? That the narrative she's been spinning for years might not be working anymore? That even in the heart of Hollywood, the sympathy has dried up, replaced with skepticism and, in this case, outright contempt? And let's not forget the royal angle. Every move Meghan makes, whether she admits it or not, reflects back on the British monarchy. When she steps into an event like the Emmys, without an invitation, and gets booed for it, the story doesn't just stay in Hollywood gossip columns. It bounces across the Atlantic. It lands on breakfast tables in London, on the front pages of British tabloids, and it forces the royal family to respond, even in silence. Don't you think King Charles and Prince William noticed? Don't you think the firm, as they call it, saw in this moment the vindication of everything they had claimed about Meghan's hunger for attention? That she craves the spotlight so much she'll risk humiliation to get it? Now let me ask you, what does it take for an entire theater full of people, actors, producers, industry veterans, people who have seen it all, to boo someone in unison? These are professionals. They're trained to maintain composure, to smile even when they're seething inside. Yet Meghan's appearance cracked that facade. The polite veneer shattered. That tells us something powerful. It wasn't just dislike. It was embarrassment. It was anger. It was Hollywood's way of saying, you don't belong here. Not tonight. Not anymore. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. This wasn't just about boos from the crowd. This was about power plays happening in real time. Security scrambling. Producers whispering furiously into headsets. Paparazzi lenses whirring, desperate to capture every second of the chaos. Meanwhile, Meghan, calm on the surface, but surely shaken inside, pressed forward, determined to make her entrance count. Have you ever wondered what drives someone to keep going even when the world is shouting for them to stop? That's the question hanging over Meghan in this moment. Was it pride? Was it desperation? Or was it, perhaps, a belief that if she just pushed hard enough, she could bend the world to her narrative again? The Emmy Awards are supposed to be carefully choreographed, every detail rehearsed and refined. Yet in that instant, with Meghan stepping into the spotlight uninvited, the script fell apart. This was raw, unscripted drama, and the world loves nothing more than a real-life scandal unfolding live. It's why the story spread so quickly. It's why the clips racked up millions of views before the ceremony was even over. And it's why we're here now, dissecting it, pulling apart every angle, every reaction, every implication. So let's be clear, this wasn't just a red carpet mishap. This was a public reckoning. Meghan Markle, once heralded as a breath of fresh air in the royal family, once embraced by Hollywood circles, now finds herself on the outside looking in. And the Emmys made that brutally obvious. But here's the twist. As humiliating as the boos were, as shocking as the scolding inside the venue turned out to be, they weren't the most explosive part of the night. No, the real story, the one that would shake even Meghan to her core, came later. Something happened behind the scenes, out of view of the cameras, that changed everything. And that's where we go next. Because if you thought the boos were bad, if you thought the whispers were cruel, you haven't seen anything yet. The true humiliation was yet to come, and no one in that star-studded room, not even Meghan herself, saw it coming. Imagine the lights. Imagine the cameras flashing, the hum of excitement vibrating through the air as limousines glide up to the entrance of the Peacock Theater in Los Angeles, home to the 2025 Emmy Awards. The atmosphere was electric, the kind of energy you could almost taste, champagne bubbles in the air, the faint rustle of designer gowns sweeping across red carpets, and the audible gasp of fans as the most beloved actors and actresses in television history stepped out of their cars. For millions watching around the world, it was the night when Hollywood put its best face forward. The Emmys are not just another award show. They are the crown jewel of television recognition, a night of glitz, honor, and prestige. Every smile is rehearsed, every angle calculated, every appearance carefully choreographed. It is perfection, or at least it is supposed to be. But that night, one unexpected entrance shattered the illusion of perfection. And it wasn't an A-list star, a beloved legend, or a breakout newcomer who turned heads in shock. It was Meghan Markle. Yes, Meghan, the Duchess turned Hollywood exile, stepping onto the red carpet as though she had been invited to one of the most exclusive evenings of the year. But here's the catch. She wasn't invited. Can you picture that moment? The cameras, primed to capture celebrities in million-dollar gowns, suddenly swung toward Meghan, confusion etched across the faces of reporters. A hush fell, like the air before a thunderclap. And then, like lightning ripping through silence, the boos came. Now, let's pause for a second. Have you ever been in a room where everyone's mood shifts instantly, where joy transforms into discomfort with the turn of a head? That's what the Emmys felt like in that instant. The perfect Hollywood night cracked. The bubble of glamour popped. And all because Meghan Markle dared to step into a spotlight that no one wanted her in. Think about that irony. For years, Meghan has chased the glare of attention. She's given interviews, documentaries, podcasts, staged photo ops, everything to maintain relevance. Yet in this moment, when she tried to claim a sliver of Hollywood's most glamorous night, the spotlight turned against her. Isn't it chilling how quickly admiration can turn into condemnation? The setup couldn't have been more poetic. Hours before Meghan's appearance, reporters had been buzzing about the nominees. Would Succession sweep the drama categories? Would Jennifer Aniston finally snag her long-overdue Emmy? Who would give the most viral speech? That's what people expected to be talking about. But within minutes of Meghan's unexpected arrival, all that changed. Phones came out, whispers spread, and Twitter, or X, as it's now called, lit up like wildfire. Suddenly, it wasn't about Best Actor or Best Comedy. It was about Meghan Markle. An actress who once walked red carpets anonymously in the background was now dominating the night. Not for her talent, not for her achievements, but because she had the audacity to show up where she wasn't wanted. And the reality? It was brutal. The jeers weren't polite coughs of disapproval or subtle looks of shade. They were loud. They were unmistakable. They echoed. For Meghan, who has always thrived on carefully controlled environments, this must have been her nightmare. She couldn't control the crowd. She couldn't silence the boos. She couldn't edit the footage. This was live, raw, and devastating. Now ask yourself, what makes a crowd of Hollywood elites, trained to maintain composure, abandon politeness, and boo someone publicly? Was it frustration? Was it pent-up irritation at Meghan's constant attempts to force herself back into relevance? Or was it something deeper, a collective acknowledgement that Meghan Markle's star, once burning so brightly, had finally collapsed? To really grasp the magnitude of this moment, we have to understand the stark contrast. Minutes before Meghan arrived, Zendaya had glided across the carpet in a gown that looked like it belonged in a museum. Applause, cheers, photographers shouting her name. Then Pedro Pascal, fresh off his role in The Last of Us, greeted reporters with charm and ease, every step captured adoringly. It was a seamless show of adulation, the kind Hollywood lives for. And then came Meghan. The applause stopped. The cheers faltered. The seamless show broke down. And in that breakdown, we witnessed something extraordinary. Hollywood saying out loud what much of the public had been whispering for years. The shocking reality is that Meghan wasn't treated like a royal. She wasn't treated like a star. She was treated like an intruder. And that word, intruder, cuts to the heart of why this chapter of her story matters so much. Because this wasn't just a Hollywood crowd booing a celebrity they didn't like. This was a rejection of her narrative. For years, Meghan positioned herself as a victim of the British royal machine, as someone deserving of sympathy, applause, and opportunities. Yet here she was, in front of an American audience, the very crowd she thought would embrace her, and instead of applause, she got scorn. Isn't it ironic? The same Hollywood she believed would be her safe haven is the very place where she was most brutally embarrassed. But here's where it gets even darker. Meghan didn't leave. She didn't turn back. She didn't melt away into the night. No, she pressed forward. She smiled for the cameras, ignoring the disapproval. She adjusted her gown as though nothing was wrong, even as boos rippled behind her. What does that tell you? Was it resilience? Or was it sheer delusion? Have you ever watched someone so committed to their performance that they ignore the reality crashing down around them? That was Meghan at the Emmys. A woman who refused to accept that the world had turned against her. And the whispers began almost instantly. Reporters, their voices low but their recorders still rolling. Who let her in? She wasn't on the list. What is she doing here? Celebrities exchanging glances, muttering to their publicists. It wasn't just the crowd. It was the entire machine of Hollywood grinding to a halt in confusion. And yet, somehow, Meghan still managed to push her way inside. The question is, how? Who opened the door? Was it a mistake? Or was it, as some claim, Meghan's team exploiting loopholes to force her presence into an event that didn't want her? And if that's true, if Meghan really did gatecrash Hollywood's biggest night, what does that say about the lengths she's willing to go for relevance? The truth is, the glamorous setup of the Emmys made her humiliation even sharper. Because everything about that night was designed for celebration. Every seat in the theater represented success. Every nomination, a crowning achievement. Every camera flash, a stamp of approval. And yet, in the middle of it all, Meghan stood as the embodiment of rejection. That's the shocking reality. And it was only the beginning. Because what happened on the red carpet was just the surface. Inside the theater, things got even worse. The boos might have been loud, but the scolding, the scolding, cut deeper than anything Meghan had faced before. And it came from someone she never expected. It started as a murmur, the kind of low, buzzing sound you can almost mistake for chatter, until it grows louder, sharper, unmistakable. At first, Some thought it was just the crowd reacting with surprise. After all, Meghan Markle's appearance at the 2025 Emmy Awards was a shock in itself. But within seconds, the sound hardened into something more brutal: boos. Loud, drawn out, echoing boos that rolled across the red carpet like a storm breaking over an unsuspecting coastline. Have you ever heard a crowd turn so fast? One moment, the cameras were flashing with delight for the stars of Succession, Euphoria, and The Crown. The next moment, that same crowd was jeering, their voices united in rejection. That's what Meghan walked into: a chorus of disapproval that not even the gloss of Hollywood could cover up. It's worth pausing here to understand the magnitude of this moment. The Emmys are not the kind of place where boos are common. This isn't a rowdy sports match or a political rally. This is Hollywood's crown jewel, where decorum is expected, where even rivals smile for the cameras. For boos to erupt in that setting, something extraordinary had to happen. Meghan's entrance was extraordinary, but not in the way she had hoped. She had envisioned cameras capturing her dazzling presence, headlines praising her audacity, social media fawning over her gown. Instead, the headlines wrote themselves in the sound of contempt. Meghan Markle, booed at the Emmys. Can you imagine what it feels like to be at the center of that? To step onto a red carpet expecting applause and find yourself swallowed by hostility? The expression on Meghan's face said everything. For a split second, her practiced smile faltered. You could see it in the tightness of her jaw, the flicker in her eyes. That moment when the mask slips, when the reality of rejection slices through the performance. But in true Meghan fashion, she recovered quickly. She forced her smile back, squared her shoulders, and carried on as though nothing was wrong. Yet the boos followed her, persistent, refusing to be drowned out by the clicking cameras. And let's not forget, this was televised. Millions watching at home could sense the tension. Clips shot from phones circulated online in real time, capturing the jeers in crystal clarity. By the time Meghan had even crossed half the carpet, hashtags were trending worldwide. Hashtag booed at the Emmys, hashtag uninvited Duchess, hashtag Markle Madness. Social media, ruthless as ever, wasted no time. Memes popped up within minutes. Meghan's face superimposed onto a no-entry sign, gifs of bouncers blocking her path, captions mocking her attempt to blend into an event that didn't want her. Doesn't it strike you as ironic? Meghan, the woman who once controlled the media with carefully staged interviews and exclusives, now found herself humiliated by the very platforms she used to amplify her voice. But the boos weren't just noise. They carried meaning. They were symbolic. This was Hollywood, a town that thrives on appearances, networking, and alliances, openly declaring its stance. When an audience this polished, this controlled, this invested in image decides to boo someone, it's not just spontaneous hostility. It's a message that said, we see through you. We don't buy the act anymore. You don't belong here. What's fascinating is how quickly the celebrities reacted. Cameras captured a variety of faces. Some shocked, others amused, a few visibly delighted by the spectacle. One actor was caught smirking, shaking his head as if to say, of course she would do this. Another whispered something to her date, who promptly rolled her eyes. But perhaps the most telling reactions were the blank ones, the stars who deliberately avoided looking at Meghan, pretending she wasn't even there. Have you ever noticed how silence can be louder than words? In that moment, both the boos and the silence painted a devastating picture. For Meghan, who has always seen herself as someone destined to shine in Hollywood, this was an unthinkable twist. The very industry she wanted to embrace her was now rejecting her publicly, and not subtly. She had hoped for applause, but what she got was condemnation. And the sting wasn't just in the sound. It was in the fact that no one stepped in to defend her. Not one A-lister came forward to applaud, to smile, to counter the boos. Meghan stood alone, the jeers bouncing off her like stones. Isn't that telling? After years of carefully cultivating Hollywood connections, through Netflix, Spotify, Oprah, and others, she found herself with no allies in her moment of humiliation. And yet, Meghan kept walking. Step after step, head held high, as though sheer willpower could drown out the noise. Some might call that bravery. Others might call it delusion. Which do you think it was? Was she a woman determined not to give her critics satisfaction, or was she simply blind to the reality of her dwindling influence? Either way, that image, Meghan walking through a sea of booze, will be etched into the memory of Hollywood for years to come. The media frenzy that followed was relentless. Entertainment Tonight replayed the footage with somber commentary. TMZ blasted headlines like Markle Mayhem at the Emmys. British tabloids pounced, calling it the Duchess's most embarrassing night yet. Even American outlets, usually more sympathetic, didn't hold back. The New York Post dubbed it Hollywood's rejection of Meghan. And on talk shows the next morning, the clips were replayed over and over, hosts debating whether Meghan's appearance was desperation or strategy. The consensus? No matter her motives, the boos were real, and they were devastating. But the most brutal aspect of all wasn't the red carpet itself. It was what those boos represented for Meghan's brand. For years, she has styled herself as a woman of resilience, someone who rises above criticism, who claims space where others would retreat. And yet, the louder the boos, the clearer the message. The world wasn't buying it anymore. The sympathy had dried up. The narrative of victimhood, of being silenced, of being unfairly treated, it had lost its grip. And Hollywood, a town that thrives on public image, delivered that verdict in the harshest way possible. Still, as humiliating as the red carpet was, it wasn't the end of Meghan's ordeal. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because once she stepped inside the theater, away from the cameras, the hostility didn't stop. It intensified. The whispers grew louder, the side-eyes sharper. And then came the moment that would eclipse even the boos, a direct, public scolding that left Meghan visibly shaken. Because as cruel as a crowd can be, there's something even more cutting about being singled out face-to-face. And inside that theater, someone was about to do just that. It's almost poetic, isn't it? On one side of the Atlantic, Meghan Markle tried to crown herself as part of Britain's royal family. A duchess, a symbol of modern monarchy, a woman who claimed to represent change. On the other side, in Hollywood, she attempted to position herself as royalty of another kind, television's darling, the Hollywood insider, the woman who belonged on every red carpet. And yet, what unfolded at the 2025 Emmy Awards made one thing brutally clear. Meghan was neither accepted as royal in Britain nor as royalty in Hollywood. She was stranded between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, rejected by both. But let's slow down. To truly understand the humiliation of that Emmy night, you have to trace Meghan's long and complicated relationship with both palaces, Buckingham and Hollywood. Once upon a time, Meghan's Hollywood dream was small and humble. She was the actress cast in bit parts on procedural dramas, the woman struggling for recognition in an industry that eats people alive. Suits was her breakthrough. Yes, but it was a cable show, not a crown jewel. She wanted more. And when Prince Harry entered the picture, Meghan saw something that Hollywood couldn't give her. Instant, global recognition. Overnight, she wasn't just an actress. She was a duchess, a bride in a royal wedding watched by billions. Think about it. How many people get that kind of leap? She didn't climb the Hollywood ladder. She catapulted over it. But the leap came at a cost. Once she walked away from the royal family, burning bridges with interviews, documentaries, and tell-all memoirs, Meghan's ties to Britain were scorched. She wasn't just rejected by the monarchy. She became a symbol of betrayal in the eyes of millions. And here's the irony. She thought Hollywood would pick up the pieces. She believed that when she and Harry set foot in California, the Hollywood elite would open their arms, invite her to the best parties, hand her the biggest contracts, and treat her as their own. Why wouldn't they? She was a duchess, after all, a royal in exile. Surely that was worth something in a town obsessed with status. But Hollywood is a different kind of monarchy. Here, crowns are replaced with golden statues, and royalty isn't inherited, it's earned, often painfully. And this is where Meghan miscalculated. Hollywood doesn't care about your titles unless they come with box office numbers, Emmy wins, or genuine talent that commands respect. Meghan had none of that. She had fame, yes, but fame without foundation is fragile. And on that Emmy night, Hollywood delivered its verdict. Can you see the contradiction? In Britain, Meghan said she was silenced, trapped in a system that never let her speak. In Hollywood, she's been given every microphone imaginable: Oprah interviews, Spotify podcasts, Netflix deals. Yet instead of thriving, she faltered. Spotify dropped her. Netflix grew cautious. Hollywood insiders whispered that she was difficult, entitled, obsessed with control. And so, when she showed up at the Emmys uninvited, that tension boiled over. The boos weren't just about that night. They were the culmination of years of whispers, disappointments, and unmet expectations. And let's not forget, the very people she wanted acceptance from, the Hollywood A-listers, are deeply intertwined with the British royals. Think about it. The Obamas, George and Amal Clooney, Elton John, these aren't just Hollywood names. They're also fixtures in royal circles. Meghan's attempt to set herself up as Hollywood royalty put her in direct comparison with the monarchy she had abandoned. And who do you think Hollywood preferred? The polished, dutiful image of Prince William and Kate Middleton, who are embraced even in American media, or the divisive chaos of Meghan and Harry? The Emmys became the perfect symbol of that conflict. Meghan arrived hoping to be seen as glamorous, independent, powerful. Instead, the crowd saw her as desperate, intrusive, and, frankly, out of place. The whispers weren't just about her being uninvited. They were about her being unwanted. That's the brutal distinction. Anyone can show up at a party they weren't invited to. But being unwanted by both Hollywood and royalty, that cuts deeper. And the symbolism didn't end there. When Meghan walked that carpet and was booed, it wasn't just Meghan Markle being rejected. It was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex. The titles she once flaunted were dragged into that humiliation. The boos weren't only for her. They were for everything she claimed to represent. Isn't that the cruelest irony? The royal family spent years warning that Meghan's hunger for attention would backfire. And here, in front of the world, Hollywood proved them right. It's worth asking, what did Meghan expect? Did she think Hollywood would choose her over the monarchy? Did she believe the industry would embrace her as their queen, their chosen royal, even after she had alienated the very institution that gave her the crown? Hollywood might love drama, but it doesn't love liabilities. And Meghan, on that night, wasn't a glamorous guest. She was a liability. A reminder that controversy follows her wherever she goes. But here's where the story takes an even sharper turn. Because while the boos were humiliating enough, the night wasn't finished with Meghan. Inside the theater, something happened that cut deeper than any jeer from the crowd. Meghan, already rattled, sought out familiar faces, industry allies, celebrities she believed would welcome her. Instead, she found icy stares, whispered mockery, and, eventually, one confrontation so direct, so humiliating, that it silenced even her. Because the clash between Hollywood royalty and British royalty was about to play out in real time, face-to-face, in a way Meghan Markle never expected. Picture this. Meghan Markle, having just endured the deafening wall of boos on the red carpet, pushes forward toward the main entrance of the Emmy Awards venue. The cameras continue to flash, though now not with admiration, but with ravenous curiosity, every lens eager to catch her next move, every microphone straining to pick up the whispers surrounding her presence. The doors of the theater, usually a seamless gateway for invited stars, suddenly become a battleground. This was where the glamour of the red carpet ended and the raw mechanics of control began. And Meghan, to her shock, was about to realize that walking inside wasn't as simple as stepping forward. The first line of defense was security. Have you ever noticed how security at award shows are like sentinels of an invisible kingdom? They smile politely, nod professionally, but their true purpose is to guard the sanctity of the event. And on this night, Meghan wasn't on their sacred scroll. Her name wasn't on the guest list. The whispers started immediately. She's not on here. Who cleared her? The security guards exchanged quick, uneasy glances. One reached for his earpiece, murmuring instructions to someone backstage. Meghan, poised and polished in her carefully chosen gown, pretended not to notice. She straightened her posture, flashed her most confident smile, and kept walking, as though she belonged, as though the world had simply forgotten to update the list. But security didn't move. One guard, firm but polite, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am. May I see your credentials?" Credentials. That word. For Meghan, who had once walked into royal palaces without so much as a question, being asked for credentials must have felt like a slap. She hesitated, then quickly tried to smooth it over. "I'm Meghan, Duchess of Sussex," she said, her voice calm but laced with urgency. The guard blinked. He wasn't impressed. Titles mean little when you're not on the list. I understand, ma'am, he repeated, but I'll need confirmation from our team. Here's where things got truly uncomfortable. Meghan, sensing the tension, began name-dropping. I'm here to support friends. Oprah knows I'm coming. Gayle King knows. I just spoke to. She rattled off names like keys on a chain, hoping one would unlock the door. But the guards remained unmoved. And here's the irony. The very people Meghan invoked to justify her presence were the same ones who weren't stepping forward to help her. No Oprah appeared to smooth the path. No Gayle King rushed to her rescue. Meghan stood alone, her carefully curated connections failing her at the very moment she needed them most. Then came the whispers, low at first, then bolder. Other guests, genuine nominees and invitees, began filing past. They glanced at Meghan, some with raised brows, others with thin, forced smiles. Can you imagine what it felt like to be standing there, held up by security, while your peers streamed past you, fully aware that you didn't belong? It was Hollywood's version of being left out of the playground game. Except this playground was global, and the cameras were rolling. But the real confrontation hadn't even started yet. Just as security debated what to do, a voice cut through the noise. A woman, sharp and direct, one of Hollywood's most respected actresses, stopped in her tracks. She turned, looked at Meghan, and with an expression that could slice glass, said, "Why are you here?" Those 4 words carried more weight than the entire chorus of boos outside. Why are you here? Not, welcome. Not so good to see you. Not even polite indifference. Just a cold, direct scolding in front of everyone within earshot. The crowd froze. Security stood awkwardly, unsure of whether to step back or step in. Meghan, for once, seemed at a loss for words. She stammered something about supporting the industry, about wanting to celebrate television, but the actress didn't relent. She shook her head, muttering, "This isn't your stage." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Meghan to stand there, exposed, humiliated, stripped of the aura she had tried so hard to project. Isn't it fascinating how sometimes it takes just one person, one sentence, to unravel an entire performance? The boos had been public, yes, but they were anonymous. A crowd, a mob, a collective force. This, however, was personal. This was face-to-face. This was Hollywood itself, through the voice of one of its gatekeepers, telling Meghan Markle she was not welcome. And yet, Meghan didn't leave. She could have turned around then, slipped back into the night, preserved what little dignity she had left. But that isn't Meghan's way, is it? She thrives on pushing forward, even when the path is littered with obstacles. So she smiled again, a smile that looked more forced now, and insisted to security, "It's fine. I'll just take my seat." Eventually, after frantic whispers into earpieces, a producer waved her through. "Let her in." The order came, though not with warmth or welcome. It was a decision made under duress, not desire. Meghan wasn't invited in. She was tolerated grudgingly. But toleration is not the same as acceptance. As Meghan stepped into the theater, escorted awkwardly past actual nominees and stars, the damage was already done. The red carpet boos had been public humiliation, but this confrontation at the entrance, was worse. It was the stripping away of illusion. It was the moment Meghan was told directly, unmistakably, "You don't belong here." And as she finally crossed into the glittering interior, what awaited her inside would make the entrance look merciful. Because if she thought she had already faced the worst of the night, she was wrong. Behind those closed doors, away from the cameras, Meghan would face the most cutting humiliation yet. A scolding so sharp, so unforgettable, that it silenced even the whispers. Because as brutal as it is to be booed by a crowd, it's nothing compared to being singled out and shamed in front of your peers. And inside that theater, that's exactly what was about to happen. Inside the Emmy Awards theater, the atmosphere was a living, breathing thing. The kind of energy that makes your skin prickle, that hums in your bones like static. Stars glittered in sequins and silk, chatter rose and fell like a tide, and cameras swiveled delicately to capture laughter, greetings, air kisses. It was Hollywood's church, its cathedral, its sacred sanctuary of glamour. But as Meghan Markle stepped past the threshold, escorted reluctantly by security after the tension at the entrance, that energy shifted again. It was as though the room collectively inhaled, waited, and then released a quiet ripple of unease. The boos on the carpet had been raw and loud, but this was worse. Silence. Silence so sharp it sliced the air. Silence that made her presence feel like a mistake carved in marble. Meghan's heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing louder than they should have in a space filled with people. Heads turned, not with the warmth of recognition, not with admiration, but with that familiar expression, curiosity laced with judgment. The kind of look you give when you see someone where they shouldn't be. Have you ever walked into a room and felt instantly that you weren't wanted? That cold wave that hits your stomach, that rush of heat in your face, as if the very walls were whispering, "You don't belong here." That was Meghan's reality in that moment. She pressed forward, adjusting her gown, her smile frozen like porcelain. She had faced stares before, of course, but this was different. This wasn't Britain. This wasn't the royals. This was her homeland, Hollywood, turning on her in real time. And it only took one person, one voice, to turn that silent tension into open confrontation. It happened near the aisle. Meghan spotted a familiar face, an actress she had once hoped would be an ally. A woman admired not just for her talent, but for her influence. One of those rare stars who can silence a room without even trying. Meghan approached with the confidence of someone trying to anchor herself, to claim even a sliver of belonging. She leaned in, smiling, preparing her greeting. But before she could finish her sentence, the actress spoke. Her voice was low, but it carried with the weight of authority. "You shouldn't be here." For words, not shouted, not cruel in tone, but devastating in their simplicity. Meghan froze, her smile faltering, her breath catching. The actress's eyes held hers, steady, unflinching, as though daring her to argue. Around them, conversations dipped, then faltered. People nearby pretended to check their phones, leaned toward their companions, their ears straining to catch every word. Meghan tried to recover. "I just wanted to show my support," she said softly, her tone carefully even, the way you speak when you're trying to keep control while the ground is crumbling beneath you. But the actress didn't soften. She leaned closer, her words sharper now, more direct. "This isn't about support. This isn't your night. You weren't invited." Can you imagine it? A room full of Hollywood's elite, watching the Duchess of Sussex being called out in plain terms. No sugarcoating. No polite Hollywood doublespeak. Just raw, unvarnished truth. Meghan, who had once sat at the top table of royalty, who had been feted and celebrated across the globe, reduced to a chastised outsider in front of the very people she once thought would embrace her. The silence grew heavier. Some stars smirked behind their champagne glasses. Others looked away, unwilling to be caught in the moment, but savoring it nonetheless. One comedian, seated a few rows back, muttered under his breath, awkward, earning a stifled laugh from those around him. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was communal. Meghan's eyes flickered, her smile cracking further. For a split second, it looked like she might turn and leave. But then, true to form, she doubled down. She lifted her chin, steadied her voice, and replied, "I have as much right to be here as anyone." Brave words, defiant words, but words that rang hollow when spoken without an invitation in hand. The actress, unimpressed, shook her head. "Not tonight, Meghan. Not like this." And with that, she turned away, effectively closing the door on the interaction. Do you know what cuts deepest in moments like these? It isn't the words themselves, it's the aftermath. Meghan stood there, exposed, adrift, the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. She had come for the spotlight, but the spotlight now burned. It was the gaze of hundreds of eyes, watching her fumble, watching her pretend she wasn't unraveling. Isn't it cruel how an entire room can feast on someone's discomfort while maintaining the facade of civility? The whispers reignited like sparks catching dry grass. Did you hear that? She wasn't invited. Who does she think she is? Phones buzzed in clutches of manicured hands. Someone live-tweeted the confrontation before Meghan even reached her seat. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze again. Clips didn't exist yet, but the words spread like wildfire. Meghan Markle scolded inside the Emmys. Hashtags multiplied. Commentary exploded. For someone who has always sought to control her own narrative, this was her worst nightmare. Her story spiraling out of her grasp in real time. And yet, what's remarkable, what's almost tragic, is that Meghan didn't leave. She could have walked out then, spared herself the coming storm, salvaged some dignity. But no. She pressed on, moving toward the rows of seats, settling into a spot that wasn't hers by right, but by the reluctant tolerance of producers who didn't want to cause more chaos. She adjusted her gown again, crossing her legs, forcing herself to appear unbothered, as though the confrontation hadn't happened. But everyone knew it had, and that knowledge hung in the air like perfume gone sour. This was more than humiliation. This was symbolic exile. Meghan wasn't just scolded by one actress. She was scolded by Hollywood itself, the entire industry embodied in that one cutting exchange. The royal family had pushed her out, yes, but now Hollywood had closed its arms too. Two worlds, two kin. But if Meghan thought the night couldn't get any worse, she was wrong. Because backstage, away from the eyes of the audience, the Whisper Network was already spinning. Microphones caught words that weren't meant to be heard. Celebrities gossiped in hushed tones, their laughter sharper than applause. Meghan wasn't just scolded, she was dissected, mocked, and ridiculed behind closed doors. And soon, those whispers would leak out, amplified by the press, magnified by social media, and immortalized in memes. Because the boos were loud, the scolding was brutal. But the backstage gossip? That was the knife that twisted deepest. If the red carpet humiliation and the scolding in the theater were brutal, what happened backstage was even worse. Because while boos are loud and scoldings sting, whispers can kill reputations. Whispers linger. They travel faster than applause, sharper than criticism, and when amplified by the world of Hollywood gossip, they become legend. And on Emmy night, Meghan Markle became the centerpiece of the Whisper Network. Picture the scene, behind the velvet curtains, in the narrow hallways where staff, assistants, and stars mingled between segments. The air was electric with chatter. Celebrities leaned against walls, sipping champagne, touching up their makeup, exchanging knowing glances. Producers darted around with clipboards, whispering instructions into headsets. This is the space where the real stories of the night are written, the off-camera moments that shape what people remember. And Meghan, still reeling from her public scolding, found herself walking straight into the lion's den. Have you ever entered a room and immediately felt the laughter was about you? That sudden hush, followed by the rustle of whispered words as people pretend to be casual? That's what Meghan walked into. Every eye flickered toward her. Every group that had been buzzing with excitement shifted tone. She wasn't a guest here. She was the story. At first, the whispers were cautious. She's really here? How did she get in? Who cleared this? But as Meghan lingered, pretending to belong, the whispers sharpened. A comedian muttered to a colleague, "Guess she thought it was open mic night." An actress whispered, "This is the Emmys, not a Netflix pitch meeting." And perhaps the most cutting remark came from a producer, caught on a hot mic he thought was muted. If she wants a role, she should try the audience, not the stage. Brutal, unfiltered, and picked up by just enough ears to spread like wildfire. The irony here is palpable. Meghan has always claimed that she was silenced by the royal family, that whispers behind palace walls tried to break her. Yet here, in Hollywood, the world she thought would embrace her, those same whispers came back to haunt her, this time sharper and less forgiving. Doesn't it strike you as poetic justice? To escape one palace of whispers, only to walk into another? And it wasn't just idle gossip. The whispers had weight. Industry insiders speculated openly that Meghan's appearance was a desperate stunt. She's fishing for relevance, one producer was overheard saying. Another, an agent with a client up for an award, remarked, "She's toxic. If she attaches herself to a project, it sinks." Can you imagine the sting of hearing those words, not in headlines, not on Twitter, but in real time, from the very people whose approval you crave? What made it worse was the laughter. Oh, the laughter. Not the kind you hear during a comedy routine, but the snide, hushed chuckles of people mocking someone who isn't in on the joke. Meghan's name was the punchline. Did you hear she tried to sit near the Succession cast? Security had to move her back. She told someone she was Oprah's guest, but Oprah didn't even show up tonight. Each story, exaggerated or not, passed from ear to ear, gathering momentum, painting Meghan not as a glamorous duchess or a wronged outsider, but as a desperate figure stumbling through a night that was never hers. And Meghan knew it. She could feel the eyes, hear the snickers, sensed the shifting tone every time she walked past a group. She adjusted her dress again and again, smiled at people who barely acknowledged her, forced laughter at jokes not directed at her. Isn't it cruel how someone can be surrounded by people and yet feel utterly alone? That was Meghan in those hallways, a duchess stripped of her crown, an actress without a stage, a woman who wanted to belong but couldn't force the world to accept her. Meanwhile, the press backstage picked up on the energy. Reporters, always attuned to gossip, scribbled notes furiously. Camera operators aimed their lenses just slightly off the stage, hoping to catch candid moments. A sound technician whispered to a colleague, "This is better than the show." Even among the crew, Meghan had become the spectacle. And then came the cruelest twist. Meghan overheard it. She caught fragments of conversations not meant for her ears. "She doesn't fit in. What's she doing here? She's embarrassing herself." Those words, whispered but sharp, cut deeper than the booze outside. Because when you hear the jeers of a crowd, you can convince yourself it's noise, faceless, impersonal. But when you catch whispers with your own ears, whispers that slice through your carefully constructed image, there's no escape. They're personal. They're undeniable. Now ask yourself, why didn't anyone step in? Why didn't a single ally, a single friend from Meghan's supposed Hollywood circle, stand beside her? The answer is brutal in its simplicity. Hollywood is transactional. Allies disappear when you have nothing left to offer. And Meghan, in that moment, had nothing. She wasn't a nominee. She wasn't a presenter. She wasn't even an invited guest. She was baggage, and no one wanted to carry her weight. But Meghan wasn't ready to leave. She wasn't ready to admit defeat. Despite the whispers, the humiliation, the rejection, she pressed forward. She walked into the main seating area, guided reluctantly by staff, hoping that if she could just settle into a chair, the night might smooth itself out. But the whispers followed her, trailing her like shadows, echoing louder than applause. And as the ceremony began, Meghan's humiliation was far from over. Because while the whispers backstage had been cruel, the public spectacle that unfolded during the seating debacle would be even worse. Because it's one thing to be mocked behind your back. It's another to be moved, in full view of the cameras, from the front to the back, reminded, once again, that you don't belong. The moment Meghan stepped into the main seating area, the weight of the night pressed even heavier against her shoulders. The Emmys, more than any other award show, is about placement. Where you sit is more than logistics, it's hierarchy. Front row seats are reserved for nominees, winners, and legends. The further back you go, the less important you are. And when Meghan Markle tried to slip into a seat near the front, the entire hierarchy of Hollywood seemed to collapse on her at once. She moved with confidence, her gown sweeping behind her, her head held high as though she were still entering Westminster Abbey rather than an Emmy theater. She slid into a chair in the third row, an area designated for A-list actors, nominees, and industry veterans. For a moment, she seemed to exhale, as though the nightmare of the booze, the scolding, and the whispers might finally fade. But almost immediately, the tension in the room spiked. A producer, headset in place, rushed over, whispering urgently to a seat coordinator. Then, like dominoes, ushers began conferring in hushed tones. Meghan, the Duchess once seated at royal banquets and global summits, now found herself the subject of a logistical crisis. Where do we put her? Have you ever been at a wedding or gala where someone sits at the wrong table, and everyone knows it? The awkward smiles, the polite but forced requests to shift down or swap seats. Multiply that discomfort by 1,000 cameras and millions of viewers, and you'll understand Meghan's situation. At first, the approach was gentle. A young usher leaned in, smiling tightly, and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, this seat is reserved. May I escort you to your section?" Meghan's smile froze. Reserved. That word echoed like a slap. Reserved for who? Reserved for those who belonged. She hesitated, insisting quietly, "I'm fine here." But the usher didn't retreat. Within seconds, a second staffer appeared, then a producer. The message was clear. She had to move. The cameras didn't catch the words, but they caught the body language. Meghan rising reluctantly from her seat, smoothing her gown with sharp, hurried motions. The actors around her tried not to stare, but their sidelong glances said everything. Some smirked, others whispered, and one nominee even raised an eyebrow as if to say, really? That small exodus, Meghan being escorted away, wasn't just about seating. It was a public demotion. And here's where it gets crueler. Meghan wasn't led to another front row spot. She was guided further back. First, a side section near industry executives. No, not there, it was full. Then further back, into the general audience seating. Each step down the aisle was another cut, another reminder of where she stood in Hollywood's eyes. Not at the top, not even in the middle, but at the back, with the people whose names would never be read from the stage. The whispers reignited. Did they move her? She wasn't supposed to sit there. They're sending her back. Phones lit up again, thumbs tapping furiously as gossip flowed into Twitter feeds and Instagram stories. Within minutes, screenshots of Meghan being escorted by ushers were circulating online. The captions were merciless, from Duchess to seat filler. Back of the house, back of the line. The humiliation that had begun outside now reached its crescendo inside. But the most devastating part wasn't just the move, it was Meghan's reaction. She tried to smile, to act unbothered, but her eyes betrayed her. Cameras zoomed in on her face, catching that flicker of discomfort, the tightness around her mouth, the way her jaw clenched as she sat down in her new spot. Once, she had sat beside the Queen of England. Now, she sat beside a sitcom extra and an industry sponsor. Isn't it ironic how far the mighty can fall in just a few short years? And the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Seating is power. The royals had stripped her of her official role, leaving her to claim relevance on her own. Hollywood had now stripped her of symbolic space, literally moving her from the front to the back. It was a mirror image of her trajectory, once elevated, now diminished. Some stars tried to act diplomatic, offering Meghan polite smiles as she settled. But others couldn't resist. A comedian nearby whispered audibly enough for those around him to hear. Guess the front row was too full of actual stars. Laughter rippled softly. Meghan shifted uncomfortably, adjusting her dress again, trying to focus on the stage. But the damage was done, and it didn't end there. Reports later revealed that Meghan had attempted to move forward again during a break, only to be stopped once more. Security intercepted her this time, not ushers. Firm, direct, unyielding. She was told she had to remain in her assigned seat. Can you imagine that? A woman who once had footmen bowing and opening gilded doors for her now being told, stay where you're told, like a misbehaving guest. The internet devoured it. Memes flooded timelines. Meghan's face superimposed on a musical chairs game. Captions like find your seat, Duchess. Late-night comedians teased the story in their monologues, poking fun at her seat downgrade. Even British tabloids, always eager for a royal scandal, published gloating headlines. Hollywood sends Meghan to the back row. But here's the cruel twist. Meghan wasn't ready to fade into the background. No matter how humiliating the seating debacle was, she refused to let it be the end of her story. Instead, she plotted her next move, one that would drag her humiliation into even deeper waters. Because during a commercial break, when the stars mingled and stretched, Meghan made her boldest attempt of the night, an attempt to claw her way back into the spotlight. And that attempt would only end in more disaster. Because if you thought being escorted to the back was bad, wait until you hear what happened when Meghan tried to step into the inner circle of Hollywood's most exclusive clique. The Emmy Awards are not just about who wins or who loses. They're about who's seen. The moments that make the headlines often happen not on stage, but in the aisles, in whispered conversations, in group photographs where one star's hand rests casually on another's shoulder. In Hollywood, proximity is power, and Meghan Markle, demoted to the back row, wasn't about to accept invisibility. She hadn't endured boos, scoldings, and seating humiliation just to fade into the shadows. No, she was determined to claw her way back into the spotlight. And so, during a commercial break, she made her boldest move of the night. Have you ever watched someone walk into a group where they clearly don't belong? That stiff smile, that awkward laugh, the way the group shifts ever so slightly to close ranks? That was Meghan. The stage lights dimmed, cameras cut away, and stars rose from their seats to stretch, greet one another, and exchange hugs. The atmosphere relaxed. It was the in-between moments where alliances are cemented, where photographs snapped in those seconds ripple across social media for days. Meghan saw her chance. From her back row seat, she rose, smoothed her gown, and began moving toward the glittering center of the room. She spotted them instantly, the cluster of the night's most powerful figures. A-list actors, nominees, beloved veterans, all gathered in an informal circle near the front. Laughter bubbled, cameras hovered at a respectful distance, and the group glowed with that easy, unspoken sense of belonging. This was the Hollywood inner circle. Meghan's eyes lit with determination. If she could just insert herself into that group, even for a few seconds, the cameras would capture it. The image would go viral. The narrative would shift. At least, that's what she thought. She approached slowly, her smile fixed, her posture poised. She timed her entry carefully, waiting for a lull in conversation before stepping closer. "Hi," she said brightly, her voice just a little too loud, her tone just a little too rehearsed. Heads turned. The group glanced at her, their laughter faltering for a beat. Some smiled politely, others gave tight nods. But the circle didn't open. No one moved aside to make room. The body language was unmistakable. This was closed territory. Meghan lingered at the edge, laughing lightly as if she were part of the conversation, though no one had included her. Isn't it fascinating how body language can scream louder than words? A veteran actress turned slightly, her back half facing Meghan. An actor adjusted his stance to block her line of entry. A nominee, mid-conversation, gave her a quick up-and-down glance before turning back to his co-star. The group was sending a message without ever speaking it aloud. "You're not one of us." But Meghan pressed on. She leaned in, commenting on a joke she hadn't heard, clapping her hands lightly as though she were part of the exchange. It was painful to watch. A few members of the group exchanged glances, eyes narrowing, lips pursed in barely concealed amusement. One whispered something to another, prompting a suppressed laugh. Meghan's cheeks flushed, but she kept going. Have you ever tried so hard to belong that every second feels like walking on glass? That's what Meghan radiated in that moment. Determination tinged with desperation. And Hollywood, cruel as ever, fed on it. The cameras caught it, of course. Paparazzi lenses zoomed in, capturing Meghan hovering awkwardly at the edge of the circle. Clips later spread online showing the subtle shifts, the polite but chilly dismissals, the way the group simply refused to absorb her. The captions were merciless, Duchess of Nowhere. Trying too hard. From royal to third wheel. But the most humiliating moment came when Meghan tried to move even closer, physically stepping forward as though to wedge herself into the group. An actress, elegant and formidable, placed a manicured hand on Meghan's arm. Her smile was dazzling, her tone sugary, but her words were sharp enough to slice through the act. "Sweetheart, we're catching up on work here. Maybe later, okay?" It was a dismissal dressed as kindness, but everyone knew what it was, a shove, veiled in silk. Meghan froze, her smile faltering once again. She nodded, laughed softly, and stepped back. The circle closed in tighter. She was out. The internet exploded with the footage. TikTok creators looped the moment of the actress's hand on Meghan's arm, setting it to soundtracks of rejection. Twitter, sorry, X, buzzed with commentary. "You can't sit with us." Emmy edition. Memes compared her to a high school student trying to sit at the popular kids' lunch table. Even late-night hosts teased the footage, one quipping, "It looks like Meghan thought the Emmys were a networking mixer." And yet, Meghan still wasn't ready to admit defeat. After retreating briefly, she tried again. This time, she wandered toward a smaller group of actors, hoping a less high-profile cluster might embrace her. But the result was the same. Polite smiles, quick nods, and then subtle shifts to exclude her. One actor even excused himself entirely, walking away the moment Meghan joined. That stung, and Meghan knew it. She returned to her seat, her smile brittle, her gown shimmering under the stage lights that now felt harsher than ever. She adjusted her posture, smoothed her hair, and forced herself to appear calm. But inside, she had to be seething. For Meghan, whose brand has always been built on controlling the narrative, this was a nightmare unraveling in real time, beyond her control, broadcast to the world. And the cruel irony? The more she tried to reclaim the spotlight, the deeper her humiliation became. Because her next move, emboldened by desperation, would cross a line she couldn't take back. Because it's one thing to force yourself into a conversation. It's another to edge toward the stage itself. And that's exactly what Meghan tried next. The Emmys are built on ritual. Every movement, every camera angle, every segment is choreographed with military precision. Presenters know exactly when to walk out. Performers know where to stand. Winners know the path to the stage. It's a delicate dance, a tightly woven ballet of timing and control. So when Meghan Markle, uninvited, unplanned, and already the most controversial presence in the room, began drifting toward the stage during a commercial break, the choreography cracked. For a few tense moments, Hollywood itself seemed to hold its breath. It started innocently enough. Meghan rose from her seat, smoothing her gown, her expression set in that familiar mask of confidence. She moved slowly at first, as though simply stretching her legs. But her trajectory wasn't random. She was heading forward, toward the stage, toward the cameras, toward the sacred center of the evening. Have you ever watched someone inch closer and closer to a line they're not supposed to cross? That's what the room felt like in that moment. Ushers stiffened. Security exchanged glances. Producers, eyes glued to monitors backstage, suddenly sat upright. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't in the plan. Meghan Markle, who hadn't even been on the guest list, was now making